When we think of naval warfare, we often imagine battleships exchanging thunderous broadsides, aircraft carriers launching squadrons into the sky, or submarines lurking silently beneath the waves. Yet, one of the most decisive innovations of the Second World War was not a mighty gun platform or a hidden predator, but something far more practical: the amphibious ship. These vessels, designed not for fleet duels, but for delivering men and machines directly onto hostile shores, transformed the nature of war. Without them, the great amphibious operations of the conflict, such as the landings in Normandy, Sicily, or the Pacific Islands, would have been impossible. Amphibious ships were, in a sense, bridges of steel and wood, carrying entire armies across oceans and setting them down on beaches under fire. The story of these ships is one of ingenuity, urgency, and adaptation. They were not built for beauty nor for prestige, but for necessity. In their blunt bows and cavernous holds, in their ramps and cranes, lay the promise of victory. The Second World War began in 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland and quickly spread across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. For the first years, amphibious warfare remained limited. Germany, despite its rapid conquests, did not develop large-scale landing ships. Its plan to invade Britain, Operation Sea Lion, failed in part because it lacked the specialized craft needed to put an army ashore across the English Channel. By contrast, the Allies, particularly Britain and the United States, soon realized that defeating the Axis would require storming occupied coastlines. Whether in Europe, where Hitler's Atlantic Wall bristled with defenses, or in the Pacific, where Japan had fortified islands across vast distances, the ability to land troops under fire became a strategic necessity. The First World War had shown how difficult such operations could be. At Gallipoli in 1915, Allied troops suffered terrible losses trying to land from small boats against entrenched defenders. The lesson was clear. A new type of vessel was needed, one that could carry heavy equipment, land directly on beaches, and withdraw swiftly under fire. Thus, the Second World War became the crucible in which amphibious ships were born and perfected. Britain, facing invasion in 1940, began experimenting with landing craft. The United States, entering the war in 1941, brought industrial might to the problem, mass-producing an astonishing variety of designs. Japan and Italy also built amphibious ships, though on a smaller scale. These vessels came in many shapes and sizes: small landing craft that carried a single platoon, larger landing ships that could transport tanks and vehicles, and massive landing ship docks that acted as floating harbors. Together, they formed the backbone of operations that reshaped the war and the world. The amphibious ship, unlike the grand battleship or the sleek destroyer, was not born out of centuries of tradition. It was an invention of urgency, designed and built in the heat of necessity. By 1940, Britain and later the United States realized that defeating their enemies would require a completely new family of vessels. The design process was swift, experimental, and often improvised, but from it emerged some of the most effective ships of the war. Early British experiments. The first real steps came in Britain. After the disaster at Dunkirk in 1940, the Royal Navy understood that the ability to land troops directly on enemy shores was not optional but essential. Winston Churchill, ever the visionary, ordered the design of new landing ships. The result was the landing ship, infantry, LSI, merchant ships converted to carry soldiers and their landing craft. From these LSIs, small craft could be lowered into the water, filled with men, and sent toward the beach. But the real breakthrough was the landing craft, tank, LCT. This ungainly vessel had a flat bottom, a wide deck, and a bow ramp. For the first time, tanks could be driven straight onto a beach. Though difficult to maneuver and uncomfortable at sea, the LCT proved revolutionary. The American contribution, When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941, it brought with it a vast industrial base capable of mass production. American designers quickly adopted and expanded British concepts. One of the most famous contributions came from Andrew Higgins, a boat builder from New Orleans. Higgins designed a small craft with a shallow draft, a ramp at the bow, and space for a platoon of soldiers. Known officially as the Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, LCVP, or simply the Higgins boat, this vessel became iconic. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later declared that Higgins had won the war for us, for without his craft, the invasions of Europe and the Pacific would have been impossible. Beyond small craft, the US developed larger ships, landing ship, tank, LST, enormous vessels, over 300 feet long, capable of carrying tanks, trucks, and hundreds of men directly onto beaches. Landing ship, dock, LSD, floating docks that could flood their well decks, launching smaller landing craft from inside. Attack transports, APA, ships built to carry troops across oceans and deliver them to the shore in waves of landing craft. Each of these designs reflected the growing sophistication of amphibious warfare. By combining small and large craft, the Allies created an entire ecosystem of ships that could deliver armies onto hostile coasts. Industrial scale and shipyards. The design was only half the story. The other half was production. In American shipyards, particularly along the Gulf Coast and the Great Lakes, amphibious vessels were churned out by the hundreds. Welded rather than riveted, these ships could be built quickly, sometimes in a matter of weeks. In Britain, shipyards along the Clyde and the Tyne produced landing ships under the pressure of constant air raids. Canada and Australia also contributed, building craft for Pacific operations. By 1944, this combined industrial effort had created fleets of amphibious ships on a scale never before imagined. They were not elegant, but they were effective, each one a vital link in the chain that would lead from ship to shore and from occupation to liberation. Amphibious ships were defined not by elegance but by functionality. They were designed to carry men, vehicles and equipment directly onto hostile shores, which meant balancing cargo capacity, seaworthiness, and defensive capabilities. Across the different classes, landing craft, tank landing ships, attack transports, the technical diversity was remarkable. Landing craft, vehicle, personnel, LCVP/Higgins boat. The Higgins boat, the most famous small landing craft, was deceptively simple. Length approximately 36 feet, 11 meters. Beam, width 10 feet, 3 meters. Draft 3 feet, 0.9 meters. Capacity, one platoon of 36 men or a jeep and 12 soldiers. Speed, up to 12 knots. Armament, typically a single 30 caliber or .50 caliber machine gun crew, 3 to 4 sailors. Its shallow draft allowed it to run directly onto beaches, while the bow ramp permitted rapid disembarkation of troops and vehicles. Its plywood hull and sturdy design allowed for relatively low production costs and mass manufacturing. Landing ship, tank, LST. The LST was a much larger vessel, essentially a floating garage capable of carrying heavy armor and hundreds of troops. Length 328 feet, 100 meters. Beam 50 feet, 15 meters. Draft 3 to 8 feet, 1 to 2.4 meters. Adjustable for beaching. Displacement approximately 4,000 to 5,000 tons. Cargo capacity up to 20 Sherman tanks, dozens of trucks, and hundreds of soldiers. Speed 10 to 12 knots. Armament light anti-aircraft guns, typically 40mm and 20mm cannons. Crew 100 to 120, plus embarked troops. The LST's innovation was its bow doors and ramp, which allowed tanks and vehicles to drive directly onto the shore. Its flat-bottomed hull allowed beaching in shallow water, while ballast tanks could adjust stability at sea and during unloading. Attack transports, APA. Larger than LCVPs but smaller than LSTs, attack transports carried troops across oceans and coordinated their landing with smaller craft. Length 400 to 500 feet, 120 to 150 meters. Beam 60 to 70 feet, 18 to 21 meters. Speed 16 to 18 knots. Troop capacity up to 1,500 soldiers. Armament, a combination of 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. Crew, 400 to 500, including ship's company and landing craft crews. APAs featured davits for launching multiple LCVPs, allowing troops to assault the shore in organized waves. Their design emphasized both endurance for long transoceanic voyages and flexibility for coordinated amphibious assaults. Landing ship, dock, LSD. The LSD was a remarkable innovation, essentially a floating dock that could carry and launch smaller landing craft from within its hull. Length, 457 feet, 139 meters. Beam, 72 feet, 22 meters. Displacement, 4,800 to 8,000 tons. Speed, 15 knots. Armament, 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Crew, 350 to 400, plus embarked troops and craft crews. Capacity, could carry up to 36 small landing craft or several tanks and vehicles. The LSD's flooding well deck allowed amphibious units to remain partially inside the ship until launching, offering protection from enemy fire and rough seas. Its flexibility made it a key asset in both European and Pacific operations. Innovations. Across classes. Several design features defined amphibious ships, bow ramps and doors, essential for rapid disembarkation of troops and vehicles. Shallow draft hulls allowed ships to approach beaches closely without grounding. Mass production techniques, welded hulls, prefabricated components, and standardized designs enabled rapid construction. Integration of smaller craft. Larger ships could carry multiple LCVPS or LCMS, landing craft, mechanized, for layered assault waves. Armored decks and gun mounts provided minimal but essential defensive firepower against aircraft and light shore batteries. Together, these innovations transformed the amphibious ship from a simple transport into a formidable instrument of war, capable of projecting power from sea to land with precision and efficiency. Amphibious ships were more than technical marvels. They were the backbone of some of the largest and most complex military operations in history. Their service spanned multiple theaters, from the beaches of Normandy to the coral atolls of the Pacific, and each voyage carried men, machines, and dreams of victory. Early operations in the Mediterranean. The first significant Allied amphibious operation was the invasion of North Africa, known as Operation Torch, in November 1942. Landing ships carried thousands of American and British soldiers across the Atlantic, delivering them to the beaches of Morocco and Algeria. These landings highlighted both the potential and the challenges of amphibious warfare. Stormy seas, navigational errors, and coastal defenses caused confusion, yet the combination of LSTs, LSIs, and smaller landing craft allowed troops and vehicles to reach shore rapidly. The success of Torch demonstrated that amphibious ships were indispensable for projecting power across vast distances. In 1943, the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, further showcased their effectiveness. Hundreds of landing craft ferried Allied forces onto well-defended beaches. Coordinated waves of troops, tanks, and artillery, supported by naval gunfire, allowed the Allies to overcome formidable Axis resistance, establishing a beachhead that would eventually lead to the liberation of Italy. Normandy, D-Day, June 6, 1944. The Normandy landings remain the most famous amphibious operation of the war and the largest in history. Over 5,000 landing craft, hundreds of LSTs, APAS and LCVPS carried over 156,000 Allied troops onto 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Each ship had a specific role. APAs delivered waves of infantry, LSTs discharged tanks and artillery directly onto the sand, and LCVPs brought in reinforcements continuously. The sheer scale required unprecedented coordination of navigation, timing, and logistics. Despite heavy German fortifications, mines, and machine gun fire, the landing ships delivered men and equipment onto the beaches with remarkable efficiency. The courage of the sailors who piloted landing craft under fire and the engineering that allowed the LSTs to beach and retract repeatedly were critical to the success of D-Day. The Pacific Theater. Amphibious ships were equally vital in the Pacific, where island-hopping campaigns required assaulting heavily fortified atolls. Guadalcanal, 1942 to 1943. Landing ships delivered marines and equipment under enemy fire, enabling the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific. Tarawa, 1943. LSTs and LCVPS struggled against coral reefs, yet their ability to put tanks and troops ashore determined the outcome of this bloody battle. Iwo Jima and Okinawa, 1945. These massive amphibious operations involved hundreds of landing ships delivering tens of thousands of men. The well-decked design of LSDs and the flexibility of LSTs were crucial in supporting continuous waves of troops while under kamikaze attacks. The combination of large and small ships, meticulously timed landings, and integration with air and naval bombardment turned amphibious warfare into a precise, if costly, science. Special operations and innovation. Amphibious ships also supported unconventional missions, commando raids along occupied coastlines, using small landing craft to strike behind enemy lines. Rescue operations, extracting troops from isolated beaches or islands. Supply operations, ensuring forward deployed forces remained equipped and fed. Their versatility made amphibious ships indispensable, whether in conventional invasions or behind enemy lines operations. Service across the war. By the end of World War II, thousands of amphibious ships had been produced and deployed by the Allies. Each ship type, LCVP, LCT, LST, APA, LSD, had been tested under fire. Each had contributed to the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Japan. Their service records were filled with stories of courage, endurance, and ingenuity, and their crews often faced the deadliest combination: enemy fire, rough seas, and the urgency of landing troops under impossible conditions. Amphibious ships were not just vessels, they were enablers of strategy, instruments that turned ideas into reality, carrying soldiers from the relative safety of the ocean to the chaos of the battlefield. Amphibious ships of the Second World War were more than mere transports. They were the instruments through which history was made. Their service was marked by daring victories, heartbreaking losses, and stories that became legends, echoing long after the guns fell silent. The Normandy landings, a landmark in history. June 6, 1944, remains the most iconic date in amphibious warfare. On D-Day, over 5,000 landing craft, hundreds of LSTs, APAS, and LCVPS delivered Allied troops to the shores of Normandy. Each landing ship carried a mission: to deploy soldiers, tanks, and artillery under heavy enemy fire. At Omaha Beach, for example, landing craft were battered by waves and subjected to intense German fire. Many vessels were damaged or sunk, yet the continuous flow of reinforcements kept the assault alive. Soldiers often remembered the churning deck of LCVPS, the smell of diesel and salt, and the roar of artillery as they approached the shore. These ships became not just transporters, but lifelines, their crews risking everything to ensure men reached land. The successful landings cemented the amphibious ship's place in military history, proving that strategic mobility across water could decide the fate of entire nations. Pacific Island campaigns, bravery. Amid coral and fire in the Pacific, amphibious ships faced unique challenges: reefs, shallow waters, and fortified Japanese positions. Tarawa, 1943. LSTs and LCVPs struggled against coral reefs. Many soldiers had to wade through chest-high water, while crews tried to maneuver vehicles ashore. Despite heavy casualties, the islands were captured thanks to the flexibility and perseverance of the amphibious fleet. Iwo Jima, 1945. LSTs delivered tanks and artillery directly onto beaches under continuous enemy fire. Crew and soldiers alike endured Japanese artillery and mortar attacks while unloading cargo, a vivid testament to the bravery inspired by these ships. Okinawa, 1945. Thousands of troops were landed in a sustained assault. Amphibious ships faced constant threats from kamikaze attacks, yet they ensured continuous reinforcement and supply for the prolonged campaign. These battles demonstrated that the amphibious ship was not merely a logistical tool, but a combatant in its own right, facing the dangers of war alongside the soldiers it carried. Tragic losses and shipwrecks. The sea itself was often the deadliest enemy. Amphibious ships, with their flat-bottom hulls and shallow drafts, were vulnerable to storms, reefs, and mines. USS LST-342 sank during the invasion of Sicily due to torpedo damage, taking hundreds of men to the seabed. USS LST-314 struck a mine near Salerno, Italy, and went down with dozens of troops aboard. In the Pacific, many smaller LCVPs were destroyed while crossing coral reefs. Yet even in loss, these ships enabled landings that could not have succeeded otherwise. Each loss left a legacy, commemorated by surviving crew and soldiers, and later remembered in books, films, and memorials. Legends of heroism. Stories of individual bravery became almost mythic. Crews of LSTs who stayed at their posts despite fires and flooding, ensuring tanks reached the beach. LCVP operators guiding waves of soldiers under machine gun fire, sometimes sacrificing their vessels to save lives. Commanders coordinating dozens of landing ships while under shelling, showing improvisation and courage in the chaos of amphibious assault. These legends became part of the cultural memory of the war, celebrated in veterans' memoirs and documentaries, and preserved in the heroic imagery of soldiers storming beaches from landing craft. Innovation. Under fire. Amphibious ships were also platforms of innovation during these pivotal events. Ramp modifications allowed vehicles to deploy faster. Improvised flotation devices and pontoons were sometimes used to bridge gaps from ship to beach. Night landings relied on small LCVPs, guided by lights or signal rockets, a risky but often decisive tactic. The war constantly tested these ships, and each campaign led to refinements that saved countless lives in later operations. Cultural memory. The amphibious operations of World War II inspired books, films, and art. Movies like The Longest Day, 1962, and documentaries about Pacific Island campaigns immortalized the image of soldiers disembarking from LCVPs, tanks rolling off LSTs, and massive landing operations coordinated across the open ocean. Veterans' accounts often describe the rhythm of waves and engines, the smell of salt and oil, and the surreal feeling of being suspended between sea and land. A moment when courage met technology, and men relied on the ships as much as the ships relied on their crews. In sum, the pivotal events and legends surrounding amphibious ships demonstrate their transformative role in warfare. They were at once humble transports and instruments of destiny, shaping outcomes from Normandy to Okinawa. Amphibious ships of World War II were not only tools of war, but also vessels of memory. Their service, sacrifices, and innovations became part of the cultural fabric of the nations involved, inspiring stories, films, museums, and commemorations. Literature and memoirs. The story of landing ships and amphibious operations appears in countless memoirs and histories. Veterans wrote about the fear, anticipation, and adrenaline of approaching enemy beaches in small craft. The Higgins boat, with its low profile and shallow draft, became almost a literary symbol of courage and ingenuity, representing both vulnerability and hope. Historical accounts, such as Samuel Eliot Morrison's History of United States Naval Operations in World War II, detail the logistics, strategies, and heroism of amphibious operations. These works offer not only military analysis but vivid storytelling, capturing the drama of soldiers landing under fire, of tanks rolling from LSTs into surf, and of the chaos of combined naval, air, and land operations. Film and media movies have immortalized amphibious ships and their crews. Classics like The Longest Day, 1962, and The Big Red One, 1980, depict the landings at Normandy, emphasizing the coordination of landing craft, the bravery of sailors, and the challenges of storming a fortified beach. Pacific campaigns are depicted in films like Sands of Iwo Jima, 1949, showing Marines wading through surf from LCVIPS and tanks deploying from LSTs. In more recent documentaries and series, archival footage of amphibious ships reinforces their critical role. The rhythmic pounding of engines, the rolling of waves against flat-bottomed hulls, and the bow ramps lowering into surf are visual shorthand for the tension and heroism of amphibious warfare. Museums and replicas. Several museums preserve the history of amphibious ships. In the United States, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans and the USS LST 325 Museum ship in Evansville, Indiana, allow visitors to explore the interiors of these vessels, walk on their decks, and understand the scale of the operations they supported. Visitors can see the ramps, well decks, and living quarters, gaining insight into the challenging conditions faced by sailors and soldiers alike. Some ships have been restored to seaworthy condition, sailing occasionally to commemorate landings, anniversaries, or educational programs. Folklore and symbolism. Amphibious ships have also entered cultural memory as symbols of transition, from safety to danger, from ocean to shore. Veterans often recount a surreal sense of being suspended between sea and land, a liminal space where courage and trust in technology were paramount. In the Pacific Islands, stories of landings, sometimes called miracle landings, due to the precision and bravery involved, have become part of local oral histories. In Europe, beaches like Omaha, Utah, and Sword carry plaques and memorials, remembering not only the soldiers, but also the ships that made their arrival possible. Educational legacy. Amphibious ships remain central to teaching about World War II. Their study illustrates innovation under pressure, combined arms operations, and the logistics of modern warfare. Military academies analyze their design and deployment, while historians highlight their role in shaping the outcomes of global campaigns. In essence, the cultural and historical legacy of amphibious ships extends far beyond their hulls. They embody bravery, engineering ingenuity, and the triumphs and tragedies of one of history's greatest conflicts. Through books, films, museums, and veterans' memories, these ships continue to inspire and educate, reminding us of the human stories carried from sea to shore. The story of World War II amphibious ships is a tale of innovation, courage, and transformation. From their earliest designs in British and American shipyards to their decisive roles in Normandy, Sicily, and the islands of the Pacific, these vessels changed the course of warfare. They demonstrated that victory on the battlefield often began at the water's edge, and that control of the sea meant little without the ability to project power onto land. Amphibious ships embodied both practicality and ingenuity. The simple Higgins boat, with its plywood hull and bow ramp, carried soldiers to the most dangerous beaches. LSTs and LSDs, massive floating garages, carried tanks, artillery, and hundreds of men directly into combat. Attack transports coordinated complex operations, ensuring waves of troops landed precisely when and where they were needed. Each ship, regardless of size, was a crucial link in the chain of amphibious warfare. Their impact was felt across all theaters of war. In Europe, they enabled the liberation of occupied nations. In the Pacific, they made island-hopping campaigns feasible, overcoming natural obstacles and fortified positions. Even when threatened by enemy fire, mines, or storms, these ships delivered their cargo with astonishing effectiveness. Their crews faced danger with courage, their soldiers relied on them implicitly, and their success helped secure Allied victory. Beyond their military significance, amphibious ships left a lasting cultural and historical legacy. They inspired literature, memoirs, films, and documentaries, and continue to be studied in military academies. Museum ships and restored vessels allow new generations to experience the conditions of war at sea, honoring the sacrifices of sailors and soldiers alike. They symbolize not just technological achievement, but human resilience and coordination under pressure. In retrospect, amphibious ships were more than instruments of war. They were bridges between worlds. They connected ocean and land, planning and execution, engineering and human courage. They turned ideas into reality, strategy into victory, and imagination into tangible action. As we look back, it becomes clear that without these vessels, the campaigns of World War II would have been far costlier, slower, and perhaps impossible. Their story reminds us that in war, as in life, innovation, courage, and adaptation are the keys to overcoming challenges. Though the battles have ended and most of these ships no longer sail, their legacy endures. In museums, in films, in books, and in the memories of those who served, amphibious ships continue to tell their story of waves conquered, shores seized, and the indomitable spirit of men and machines working together across the vast, unpredictable sea. The amphibious ships of World War II remain a testament to an era when the world was reshaped by technology, strategy, and human determination. Their voyage is complete, yet their echo continues to inspire, educate, and remind us that even the humblest vessel can change the course of history.